This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Nick Larkey! Curtis Taylor! Stevenson with his own moves. Cunnington! North are in front!
Well, we're back after yet another loss. We're 11 on the trot now, so getting pretty used to it. But it feels a bit flatter than the last 3 weeks. I think because there was some genuine optimism going in, it felt like we were half a chance of winning, and I certainly don't think I was expecting to win, but I was expecting that we were a good chance. So it wasn't a terrible result, but I think it's that classic, it's the hope that gets you in the end. Particularly at half time, it looked, we were right in it, a couple of points down, got off to a good start. Like, there was a lot to like in that first half, and then, the second half, GWS unfortunately mostly played the game in their half. So, unfortunate, but nonetheless, it wasn't a terrible game at all. Just another loss to add to the pile. Welcome back to North Port anyway. It's great to have a long weekend. Great to have a Monday off so I can record the podcast. I'm not in a hurry. We'll see if it, makes any difference to the quality at all. I'm sure it's going to be a much higher quality podcast today. If you didn't catch the score, it was North Melbourne 75, GWS 103, so a 28-point loss. I'm going to call it a 22-point loss. I think the 50-metre penalty that resulted in a goal after the siren was a bit rubbish to me, so let's call it a 22-point loss, a 4-goal loss or thereabouts. It was fine. I thought the story of the game was actually a very similar feeling to the Carlton game all the way back in, I think that was round 4, the Good Friday match. We really looked good in patches, and there were elements where I thought we looked really good offensively, but it just seemed like GWS would waltz up the ground time and time again, sort of 20 to 30 metre kicks, end up with a relatively easy mark inside 50. Like, it wasn't absolute hell for leather. It was just take a mark, go back, quick kick, take a mark, go back, quick kick. In particular from turnovers in our front half, or even a stoppage in our front half, they would just hit targets down the line and waltz it up, and it felt quite similar to what Carlton did. We'd work really hard to get it inside 50, and it seemed a lot easier for GWS, I guess, which is a common theme for us at the moment, in that our team defense is, it's still a work in progress, I guess, which we know that. I think, in comparison to the start of the year, we're having much less of that Mackay, Logue core, just getting absolutely smashed out the back. I feel like that's nearly been eradicated. You can still see those players coming up and covering each other, which is, I think, what ends up resulting in that the next kick's always available to the Giants if they're fast enough. Because, Bergman's come up to cover someone, and then Mackay's come up to cover Bergman, and so on. But yeah, I mean, that was the story of the game. It was GWS just, were able to score more easily. They sort of waltzed up the ground, and we really had to work hard for our goals. And I mean, that's why in the end it was really, after about halfway through the third quarter, it just didn't look like we were in it. Like, we were technically in it, but it never really got close enough in the second half, where you thought, okay, we're actually a really good chance here. Before we jump into the positives and negatives, just a reminder to subscribe to the podcast, give me a rating, and follow me on socials at NorthPod Show, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever it is that you want to consume some content. All right, let's jump into the negatives. And look, I'm going to try my best to be balanced here. I mean, the first negative is Aaron Hall, and I think this is a bit of a mixture. His first half was really bad. North Melbourne Twitter was giving it to him. He missed a lot of tackles, had a couple of turnovers, and his just general lack of ability to hold a tackle probably cost us at least 3 goals. The second half, he actually kicked quite well and showed that he's able to bite off those sort of risky kicks through the corridor. In particular, I think it was late in the second quarter, but in particular, there was a passage where he had 3 kicks, or he kicked it, handball receive, kick, that ended up, I think, in a Larkey point in the end. But that's kind of the conundrum with Hall at the moment. Obviously, he's not a long-term piece for us. He's here as we're transitioning, so it is what it is. Like, he's not a developing player, but I'm just really torn on the value of him in that back line, because I really don't think he can defend. But his kicking is high risk, high reward. Like, he's made to look really silly sometimes, and we've seen that a lot this year. But I also don't think he gets enough credit for when he actually does pull off those risky kicks that gets the ball moving and gets into the corridor, and we're able to actually move it inside 50 looking dangerous rather than just bombing it. So yeah, he's a really tricky one. I'm a bit torn on his role. I don't think at the end of the season I want him in the side, but at the same time, there's not a heap of defensive options coming through / that are fit. Hopefully Gota is that. Maybe after the bye we could potentially look at swapping Gota and Hall. At the moment, Archer isn't really setting the world on fire in the VFL, and he's not really. It's not really a like for like. I think Archer's more likely to come in for someone like a core player as that third tall. He's not, I can't see Archer hitting kicks for 30 metre kicks into the corridor. So yeah, I don't know, just an interesting one with Aaron Hall. A bit of a watch, I guess, because I'm not really sure if he's giving us offensively in order to compensate for what he's not doing defensively at the moment. Because yeah, it was a bad first half. Second bad, and this is something that I think I have talked about in the previous weeks. It's that end of quarter one, end of quarter three were really bad. We really faded, conceded easy goals. And I don't know, I don't really want to be one of those people that says, look, it's definitely a fitness thing, it's definitely a focus thing. I'm not sure what it is, if it's just the momentum of the game, but yeah, that we've had a couple of instances where the end of quarters we've faded out recently, and end of quarter one, end of quarter three were bad. We conceded 2 or 3 goals in each of those late that, if we're able to hold steady in those patches, we're in the game or we win the game. So yeah, just really costly. I'm not singling out anyone in particular. It seemed to be a whole team thing. Hall certainly did feature heavily in that end of quarter one blowout, but I wouldn't have thought he was to blame for quarter three. I don't know. It was just so frustrating to see particularly the end of the first quarter, how that ended. I don't know what else to say. Part of me wonders if it is a fitness thing, just particularly with those young mids and their capacity to defend. But yeah, I mean, I really don't know. It's just frustrating, and I don't want it to happen. So yeah, perhaps potentially that whole team defense is breaking down in terms of the fitness levels that we're required to have to hold that up. But yeah, I mean, you take out the end of the first quarter, the end of the third quarter, we win the game, despite not playing super well throughout the rest of the match. So yeah, they were disappointing. The next thing, I guess, kind of links in with that. Our midfield was beaten at stoppages. We lost the clearances by 7. We were actually level with them for centre clearances, but around the ground we lost it by 7. It was 31-38. It's a little less than we've been having for the rest of the year. And I think it was that GWS were able to be damaging from stoppage, and we weren't able to be super damaged from stoppage consistently. There was certainly a couple, particularly where Taron Thomas was able to clear the ball where we did look dangerous and we were running out of the front of the stoppages. But generally speaking, I thought the Giants did look more dangerous. And look, let's be honest, it's a really young group in there. There's no Greenwood, no Cunnington, no Simpkin, no LDU. So we're missing those 2 really senior players, and also our most senior young players in terms of midfielders. So absolutely understandable that we're not quite getting it done in there, but it does make a difference in the game. Goldie was okay. I thought he was probably about even. Coleman Jones wasn't really effective as a ruckman, but I like him more as a forward anyway. So, we lost the hit-outs by 5, but I thought Goldstein was decent. It's just, I think, about getting more reps into our midfield group and particularly those young midfielders, and we will reap the benefits, in the weeks and years to come. So, yeah, just it's a negative. We lost it in the game, but I think really positive that we were able to, get more experience into Phillips and Wardlaw and Sheasel and Thomas and these guys, particularly them working together, because that's what's going to win us games sort of 3 or 4 years down the track. You look at a midfield like Melbourne with Petrarca, Oliver, and Gawn, and you think about how many centre bouncers and stoppage bouncers they've played together. They understand where each other move, and they know exactly what the other's going to do. So that's just what we need to work towards. The next thing, and I was reflecting the other week, I really haven't mentioned opposition players much on the podcast, because obviously this is a North Melbourne podcast, but really it would be remiss of me not to say, I mean, Toby Greene is just really good. I thought McDonald, who played on him pretty much all game, there was a couple of instances where McDonald got switched in that, whole ground defence where Mackay ended up on on Green. It didn't look great, but for the most part, McDonald was on him all day. And I don't really think McDonald made too many mistakes. There was one particularly bad one where he let Green goal side at a stoppage and he snapped a goal. But for the most part, I thought McDonald did a pretty good job. And Green still ended with 3 goals, 2 from 24 touches. So, he's just really good. It was a great battle between the two captains out there. And Green did go into the midfield a couple of times, but for the most part, played small forward or medium forward and looked damaging and dangerous every time the ball was heading forward. And I guess, that's the kind of small / medium forward impact that we're looking for. Zerha is that sometimes, but not regularly enough for us, not consistently enough. Potentially Paul Curtis could be that kind of player for us in the future, but he's certainly not yet. So, it was a real demonstration of what we don't have. That small to medium forward that's going to kick 2 or 3 goals, or 2 goals a game and rack up 20 touches and look dangerous at every opportunity. And Toby Greene is really good. Let's not get it twisted. We don't even need our player to be that good, but we need a player like that is always dangerous and doesn't float in and out of the game. So that was a real lesson from Toby in how to be a small forward. This next one is a little bit harsh, probably, but I'm going to go with it. I thought Taron Thomas was really good in the first half, and he seemed to fade out of the game a little in the second half. Obviously, I wasn't in Hobart, so I wasn't able to see potentially the whole ground. So potentially he was playing forward more in the second half, but he seems to be less impactful, I guess, in the second half. And maybe it's the classic: you play a good first half and you're expected to repeat that. It's not always the case. Look, he still ended with 3 goals from 19 touches, so it's still a great game from a midfield forward. But I guess the push for him is to be more consistent throughout the game. I know it's only his second game back, and it's just great to have a player of that class back in, but we've got to have him staying involved across the game, because when he's good, and that's what we need in this team. So look, it's not a massive thing. It's just let's get him playing consistently good football across the game. Let's have him racking up sort of 24 touches and kicking a couple of goals every game, because we do need those midfielders that can kick goals. And when he's breaking out of the stoppage, he's just so good. That's something that I'd like to see from him. And the final negative, I am trying my best to stay pretty positive. I feel like the last couple of games we've lapsed back into that bombing it inside 50 from time to time, which, don't get me wrong, it is way better than it was in previous years. But there was just, a couple of those examples where rather than lowering the eyes or centering it, we're kind of bombing it and in hope and making someone like Larkey or Coleman Jones have to do something special. Phoenix Spicer was guilty a couple of times. There was one instance where he was probably 75 metres out, and rather than hitting up a short sort of 30-metre pass, he's sort of swung around trying to get onto his right foot, and just bombed it, not looking, ended up straight in the hands of a Giants player. And I would have loved him to go on his left foot, hit a 30-metre pass. So, yeah, just something that's, creeping back in potentially, or something that we just need to keep an eye on. Our efficiency inside 50 was 44, nearly 45%. So it's not horrible. It's just very slightly above our average for the year. But the Giants was nearly 51%. So, they were scoring it just over one in every two times they went in, and we were a little less than one in every two. It's not a massive difference, but it's a 6 or 7% difference. And when they were kicking inside 50 more, that's the game essentially. And yeah, it's just something for us to work on. That our efficiency this year hasn't been great. I feel like we've been on the improve, but there was just a couple of examples in that game where I went, oh, we're back to those bad habits, because I don't think that we were particularly rushed in those moments. But yeah, look, just something to work on. Let's talk about the positives, because there are plenty of good things to talk about, plenty of good performances despite the result. And I somehow, if I'm finding positives, even though this is the 11th match in a row that we've lost. So we're staying positive. I can see the green shoots. I thought the first thing was that we started the game really well, and we didn't have to play from behind from the get-go. That's, something that's plagued us recently. The Essendon game, the start of that match was horrific. The Collingwood game, albeit it is Collingwood, we let them get the jump on us. Same with the Sydney game. That first 10 or 15 was horrible. But, we actually kicked the first two goals and, got out to a 2-goal lead. We looked like we were right in with a chance. Unfortunately, we let GWS really pile on a few after that. But, at least the first 10 minutes or so, we looked like we'd come to play and we were running about that. The first goal came from, I can't remember which GWS player it was, but they ran too far inside our forward 50, so that allowed Spicer to kick a goal from the error. It was a very North Melbourne-esque error, something that looks like we would have done over the past couple of years, but it's nice to get one the other way. So that was kind of, I guess, an unforced error goal, but Wardlaw's goal after that was just class, and it was great to see him kick his first goal. So yeah, I thought it was great that we were able to start positively. The next thing was just our pressure. It was there pretty much all game, and whilst the pressure wasn't always super effective, it wasn't always able to impact the Giants in the way that we were wanting to. It was there. The effort was there, and I feel like most players across the game, there was times where we were guilty of letting them off, but there was also, I'd say, most players had some great examples of executing. There was a couple of really big hits or big tackles that came from repeated corralling and pressure acts. So yeah, that was really pleasing to see that we were able to keep that up consistently throughout the game. Just going to reel off a few of those players that really looked good, like Sheasel had 28 pressure acts, the most on the ground, and had a couple of tackles. And I think that's probably a consistent thing here is a few of these players had heaps of pressure acts, but weren't able to convert that into heaps and heaps of effective tackles. I know I talked about Hall having broken tackles earlier, and he's not the only one. There's lots of these players that I guess we just need to work on executing those tackles. So yeah, Sheasel was great. Shields, who we know has been a great pickup, mature age player this year, he had 26 pressure acts and 3 tackles. Spicer had 21 pressure acts and 4 tackles, and I think there seems to be a vibe that people are kind of done with him. I don't know, like we'll see, but I thought that again, like last week, his pressure was pretty good. Obviously, he got that goal as a bit of a freebie, but he was really quick over the ground and did lay a couple of effective tackles and put on pressure that impacted the GWS disposals. It's just the old, like we're getting what we got from Kane Turner more or less. He's certainly more explosive than Kane Turner, but Kane Turner could pressure and could tackle. So yeah, Spice a bit of a wait and watch. Wardlaw was really good, 24 pressure acts and 9 tackles. So he is a bit of a tackling machine. We know that he can actually stick them. And Paul Curtis, 23 pressure acts, 3 tackles. So there's 5 players with more than 20 pressure acts and at least 2 tackles each, most of them 3 tackles each. Yeah, we were switched on. So you couldn't knock the effort from the players. And I know that sometimes there's a bit of a consensus that, like tackling, is all effort. And tackling is effort, but you've also got to be able to execute in those tackles and pin an arm or stop, actually create a stoppage or a free kick and not just hang off a player and have them easily handball off to someone else who, you may as well have not tackled in the first place. So that was really good. The broadcast did just sort of show the pressure rating, which, I'd love to know how that's calculated, but we were looking up there. We were above average, just not quite elite for a lot of patches of the game and often beating GWS's pressure rating. So that was really positive. Similar to last week, there's just so much to like about our young mids. Their stats were not as immense as they have been in some other weeks, but you can really see the potential of, something special. And most of these players I'm about to go through, they're a class above those players that we've had so many of those in recent years where they get the ball and you go, I'm just not sure if they have been effective at all today. Yeah, some really good performances. Sheasel had 24 touches, 7 marks, 2 clearances. And I just talked about his tackling and pressure acts. Scott had 23 disposals, 5 tackles. I thought he was probably a bit quieter, but still, he still got 23 times and looked okay. Wardlaw, 22 touches, 9 tackles, 6 clearances. We know he was, for his 3rd game or 4th game, he was really going in hard. Taron Thomas, 19 touches, 5 clearances, 3 goals. And his clearances were effective. He was really coming out of the front of the stoppage and looking dangerous. And it was great that he was able to kick 3 goals too. Phillips was a bit more quiet. He's had 2 really good games and he was still good, but wasn't as immense as he's been recently. He had 18 touches and 3 clearances. And Powell, who was able to play a bit more midfield time this week, but still a bit of time at half forward as well. He had 16 disposals, 2 clearances and a goal. Yeah, you can just see the real bones of a great midfield there. And obviously we haven't even added in our 2 most senior young midfielders in Simpkin and LDU into that. So yeah, the midfield was really promising. They've just got that extra class that I think we've lacked, having not had access to those really young, really strong, high-end young talent in recent year, or up until recently, I guess. Next positive, I mean, his name's shouted at the top of the podcast, Nick Larkey. He was just so good. It was great to see him getting a couple of free kicks. He's usually kind of monstered and doesn't get any help from the umpires, but he kicked 4 goals too, and one of those points was a hit the post, so he really could have had 5 goals. Was consistently a target inside 50 and up the ground. On a day where the other forwards weren't really able to consistently have an impact or look dangerous, he did the whole day. Like CCJ and Zerha and Curtis and Stevo, none of them really had the scoreboard impact. None of them looked as dangerous consistently as Larkey did. And he just, off not a lot of opportunity, he was able to kick 4. I think he's now got 36 goals for the year. Might be 4th, I think, on the Coleman Medal ladder, which, in a team going this poorly is a great job. And yeah, he's just a real credit to our recruiters because he was, not a high draft pick. He's one of those that we've developed or plucked from obscurity, so to speak, developed and he was really, really good again. I'll talk about him a bit later, but he was fantastic again, and hopefully can go close to Coleman this year. I'm sure he won't won't quite get there just based on the lack of access to the ball that he has. But I think he will go close. And when you look at it's really him scoring the majority of our goals this year. And last positive, and I guess this kind of links back to the last two things that I've said, you can really see the bones of our future team now. There's a solid 10 or 12 that you can look at them and go, yep, you're going to be in the team for the next 5 or 6 years and you're going to provide us with consistently good football. We just really need to keep building on that core, and we are going to start to pick up the wins. But, whereas in the last few years when we've been getting beaten by 70 points every week, and you've gone, gee, like how many of these players are actually going to be here when we're having success? So it's great that we can see about half a team's worth where we go, yep, you're going to be here. So I just thought, based on what I saw today, and obviously it's up to debate, but Wardlaw, Sheasel, Scott, Thomas, Logue, Coleman-Jones, Larkey, Phillips, Stevenson, Curtis, Zerha, I think are definitely here for the next 5 or 6 years, if they want to be, that is. But I think they can play footy for us for the next, 5 or 6 years and be in a decent side. I think Bergman and Ford are most likely in that list too. They're probably just one step away from confirming it. Coleman-Jones is probably lucky to be in there, but I do think that he has the potential. He's been inconsistent this year, but he's a tall forward / ruckman that they take longer. I think that he's going to fit in. Then underneath that, like not playing today, but I'm pretty confident are on that list too. Like Simpkin and LDU are no-brainers. And I think Cherry and Comben are in that group too. If they can stay fit, Comben in particular, we know that about his injury issues. And then I've just added, there's another 3 there that I've got question marks over for different reasons. I think Powell and Tucker are on the fringe. I really do hope that they are long-term consistent contributors, but I think the jury's still out whether they're going to be, depth players or whether or not they're going to make it long-term is unclear yet, but they have potential to for sure. And then, Ben Mackay is just around whether or not he stays. I think he definitely will be a great fullback, centre-half-back for whichever team he plays for, but yeah, I'm at this point we're just hoping that it is for North Melbourne, but either way, you can see there's a group there that's going to take us there. It's just where do we get those other really half that list from? And I guess there's going to be some from the draft. There's going to be some on our list that maybe we're not sure about that do make it. And then it's what else we can do with other talent, I guess. So, yeah, it's just promising to see that when you take a step back and you think about where we were maybe in 2020 or 2021, you can actually see that progress in terms of the young profile of the list that is actually going to be there. Yeah, that's the summary from the game. We'll go on to our other news from the week. It was great to see the VFL team have another win, beat the GWS team 96-44. And just kind of the usual suspects that were playing well. Lazaro was huge, had 39 touches, kicked a goal, 7 tackles. So he's going to keep knocking on the door, and I'm going to talk about him in a minute, but he's certainly there for depth for us, and if, there's some injuries in the right locations, I think he's putting himself in with a good chance. Daniel Howe's some more great depth. He had 26, 3 goals and 9 tackles, so again, if there's injuries or form, I think he's there to step up, even though the North fans don't necessarily love him. That's what he's there for. Perez had 29 disposals, looking good off halfback. Similar position, and maybe he's the sort of player that we could replace Hall with, if that's what we're looking to do. And yeah, Cooper Harvey had a couple of goals, 13 touches, so we know it's hard to stay in the game as a small forward, but yeah, he hit the scoreboard, which was good. So yeah, there's some pressure on from the VFL side. I don't think Jury or Cunnington played, so they were obviously travelling emergencies, and hard to press your chances if you're not playing. But those two are also on the fringe as well, and we've seen particularly Jury is one of those players that we're waiting to see if he can make it or not. So yeah, it's great to have that VFL pressure coming through. In terms of other news, I mean, Larkey is rumoured to be turning his back on free agency and is going to re-sign with North. It seems to have been reported by several media outlets that he's going to sign in the next couple of days. So not sure how long for, but it's great that, I mean, he was going to be a free agent at the end of 2024, so he must be signing for a little bit, which is really good. It's another player that, he's the sort of player that we want to lock up. He's a great key forward. They don't grow on trees. And, despite the fact that there's been a few times this year where the fans have got on his back because he looked a bit soft or a bit injured. Yeah, he's a as I say, they don't grow on trees. You want to lock a player like him up, just like I'd love to lock up Ben Mackay. But doesn't look like that's going to happen. So yeah, we'll wait to see if that happens in the coming days, but you'd certainly think it's this week or maybe sort of during that bye period that something might be announced, and that's really positive. Couple of other things. The fact that Cunnington didn't get back in, even with Simpkin and Greenwood out, I found to be really interesting. I guess for me, it's just hard to see Cunnington get back in this year unless we're really decimated in the midfield. I did think that Cunnington was going to be back with Greenwood out. And I guess it's really positive that we've got enough of these young midfielders coming through that, we think are playing better than Cunners. It's a little sad given what he's given to us, over the past decade and a bit. But yeah, I guess, it was just interesting to see that he wasn't able to come back in with Greenwood out. You would like to think that, there'll be an opportunity for him to have a farewell game or, to get back in for a couple of games later in the year. Just from a cultural perspective, I think he's the sort of player that deserves it. I really don't believe in, a farewell game for a player that, I think it has to be a player of that kind of stature. You can't just be for anyone. And I do think you've got to, be in some kind of form, which, he's been going okay in the VFL. Hasn't been torching it up, but has been going okay. So I would love to see him get back in at some stage, but obviously not at the expense of developing the youth long term. And just the last thing, I guess, which links in with a few of the things that I've talked about this week, just a bit of food for thought, I guess. We do seem to have probably a couple too many midfielders, which I think is a great problem to have for a couple of reasons. Obviously, we've got depth, which is great. But I think we do have to start to think about this from a, currency point of view. And is there an opportunity at the end of the year for us to look at, we've probably got a couple too many midfielders, but we are lacking in other areas such as small forwards or potentially key defenders if Ben Mackay leaves. Is there an opportunity to offload someone like Tom Powell or someone like Charlie Lazaro to try and get something for them? Now, neither of those players are going to give us much back in return, particularly Lazaro, given he can't get a game. I think at least Powell's getting a game most weeks and has showed some stuff at AFL level. So Lazaro, you're not going to get much for unless he comes into the AFL side at some point and really tears it up. But I think we have to start to think about this transactionally and go, Tom Powell, for example, is South Australian, is a Port Adelaide or a Adelaide, willing to maybe give up a draft pick or a player in return for Powell? Because at the end of the day, we're struggling to squeeze all of these midfielders in, and I feel like we've got a good balance. We've got some inside, we've got some outside, particularly if Taron Thomas is going to be around long term, which it looks like potentially maybe he will be now. We've still got some, like if Powell was in today as our sort of last midfielder that probably played the least time in there. Sure, Shields is going to come out and long term, but by the same token, there was no Greenwood, there was no Cunnington, there was no Simpkin, there was no LDU, there was no Daniel Howe. Like, all of these are players that go through the midfield. There was no Lazaro. There's also, a little bit of a different role, but there was no Curtis Taylor, who's again a bit of depth there, who's more of a half-forward wing. But I guess you can get my point here is that we probably do have a couple too many. And if we've got a couple too many in there, but we are lacking in other areas, like let's see what we can do at the trade table, I guess, is all I'm saying, because, long term, that's what we need to look for. So that was just something I was thinking about. Obviously, we're a long way away from the draft and the trade period at the end of the year, but I guess I'm just flagging it. I do like Tom Powell, but he, to me, is the one that at the moment kind of we don't have a spot for. And, maybe he's someone that we can look to offload if we're able to get something for him, I guess, because you don't want to just delist that kind of play. You want to get something, even if it's a second round draft pick, for example. I think Tom was an early second round pick or maybe a mid first round. I can't recall now, but I guess you'd want to get something back for someone like him. So let's have a quick look ahead to next week, the last game before the bye. And we've got the Dogs, another Sunday twilight game at Marvel. So a lovely fixture to send us off into our week off. They generally give us a bit of a belting, a bit of a touch up, the Dogs. I've got plenty of bad memories from Good Friday games that, doesn't fill me with joy. I can particularly remember Josh Bruce kicking 10 on us a couple of years back. As long as we can avoid that kind of embarrassment, I'm sure I've jinxed it now, but yeah, just looking for a competitive performance, really. I think the Dogs, whilst they've been a bit inconsistent this year, they are certainly a better side than us this year. I don't expect to win. It's more like going into, say, maybe like either Sydney or the Essendon game where you go, look, we are a sneaky chance, but I don't expect to win. But I do expect us to be competitive. In terms of, who might come in, I think it looks like LDU is touch and go. I don't think it's worth risking him given we've got the bye the next week. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not a trained medical expert. Maybe there's some merit in giving him a run and then having that week off. But to me, it doesn't make sense to risk him coming back from a hamstring. I'd just say let's see you at the first game after the bye. Assuming that Simpkin and Greenwood are fit to play, I think they both come straight back in. Particularly Simpkin, but Greenwood's been in such good form. I can't see him not coming straight back in. So it'll be interesting to see out of those two who maybe comes out. The other comment, I guess, is that the Dogs are quite a tall team, particularly in the forward line. They've got Norton, they've got Rory Lobb, obviously Tim English in the ruck. They've had to put Josh Bruce back. They've got some tools there. So potentially this is one of those games where we could play Core as our sort of third medium tall. He was our sub on the weekend, which was a very hotly debated choice. I mean, it worked out well in the end because Bergman wasn't having much of a game. So, we were able to sub Core in the last quarter, and he did impact the game at least. But, from the outside, he was a strange choice as a sub. Anyway, he's the sort of player that maybe could come in. Potentially, that's an Aaron Hall replacement if we're looking for one, which I think we are. In terms of other fringe players, I mean, looking at the fact that we're probably going to have two midfielders come back in, I'd say that Powell and Tucker are probably the most fringe midfielders that played. Spicer also, obviously not as a mid, but as a small forward, he's probably the other fringe player. I mean, Paul Curtis has been in and out as well as a small forward, but I'd like to see him play again after his match on the weekend. I just think that we've got to keep getting games into him. And to be honest, I really don't think Spicer deserves to be dropped. But yeah, of those three, that's where I see it. I just think that midfield mix with everyone coming back is going to be interesting. I think seeing who can play, be effective at off half forward and actually spend some time on the ground but not in the midfield is going to be interesting because we know that Taron Thomas can do that. So he's definitely one that can play midfield and forward effectively. I mean, Sheasel can play most positions on the ground. It's just around, like Powell and Phillips and Wardlaw. Can any of those players be effective elsewhere? Because I think if they're able to be an effective half forward, that gives them a much better chance of playing when we get the big boys in Simpkin and LDU and Greenwood back in. So, yeah, look, I don't profess to know. If I had to have a guess, I'd say we're going to have Simpkin, Greenwood and Core come into the starting 22. And I will say Powell, Tucker, and haul out. I think Bergman was quiet, but I think he keeps his first 22 spot, and then maybe it's Tucker's turn to be sub. I mean, Power was sub the other week, so I don't think you want to make the same player consistently the sub, because generally it means they're not getting as much game time. But maybe a Tucker sub. I really don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see, and then we'll head into the bye after that. But I think that's about all I've got to cover this week. I always think it's going to be a shorter podcast, and it ends up being a normal length. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Just a quick reminder to rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on your chosen podcast platform. Reviews really help circulate the podcast and helps others to see it. So I really appreciate everyone's support and sharing and retweeting and recommending the podcast to people that they know, particularly obviously North Melbourne fans. And follow me on social media at NorthPod Show, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all of those brands. It's just great to interact. I'd say Twitter is where I interact with people the most, but you can certainly get in touch with me on any of those platforms. So I hope everyone has a great week. I hope everyone's enjoyed their long weekend. And I guess I'll speak to you after the Dogs game. I'm sure that's going to be a Monday podcast again. I doubt I'll be able to record and get it out before that. So that's probably when I'll speak to you next. All right, have a good one, and go Roos.